What can the New York Mets expect out of David Peterson and Tylor Megill in 2022? I'll discuss that on today's episode of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans who are watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing about the Mets at justbaseball.com. So as we now get into these season previews for Mets players, their pitchers, all of these different guys heading into spring training, what I want to do is look at all the different projections that we can find on Fangraphs. There's 6 different projection models that they have: Zips DC, the Bat ATC, FGDC, Steamer, and Zips. Go through those numbers for what they're projected to do a recap of their past season, and then look forward to what I expect from these guys as we head into the 2022 season. So we're going to start looking at these projection models, and all of them have David Peterson between 13 and 19 starts, 61 and 91 innings, averaging 4.6 to 4.7 innings per start, an ERA between 4.16 and 4.68. Now, that would be pretty much online with what we've seen in the past. It's almost splitting the difference from his really strong 2020 season and his bad season in 2021 to get to those numbers. And if you look at what Peterson did this past year, there wasn't a lot of in between. He would either go out, be on, and have a great start where he'd give you maybe more than 5 innings and keep the other team at bay, or he was getting knocked out of games early and giving up a ton of runs. So it was a season of really hit or miss action for Peterson. There wasn't that much in between where maybe he would give you 6 innings but give up 4 runs. We didn't see that as much. In 2020, we saw that a bit more. And one of the interesting splits to look at for Peterson this past year is he had almost a 2019 Steven Matz season, because at home, he had a 2.84 ERA. On the road, he had a 7.97 ERA. Now, it's hard to tell or to make too much of those numbers, those splits. Obviously, the Mets do pitch in a very pitcher-friendly ballpark opposed to some of the other stadiums that they visit. And Peterson, as a guy who can give up fly balls and give up home runs, benefits from a little bit of a larger porch out in Citi Field. But looking at the 2022 season, I don't necessarily believe those numbers will repeat themselves. He got hurt in the middle of the year, only made 15 starts. It's a small sample size. All we have is small sample sizes to gauge Peterson's value. But you look at the advanced metrics on Peterson, and they're not pretty. I mean, he got hit hard. He walked a lot of batters, wasn't generating real swings and misses. And this ceiling has never really been the highest with the David Peterson. This is a pitcher that had the high floor. You knew he would be able to stick in rotations, but you look at his stuff and he just doesn't have overpowering, offerings that lead you to believe that he's going to suddenly become a strikeout pitcher. He has to rely on contact and trying to induce soft contact. And the problem is he was just getting way too much of the plate, particularly with his sinker. If you look at, the pitches that are classified as sinkers, and it's so hard because you look at Baseball Savant and they break it down for you, but a pitch that was classified as a sinker could have been a 2-seam fastball. You never really know exactly what pitch was thrown unless you ask the pitcher. As great as these models have gotten to be able to differentiate what is what, they're not 100% accurate. But still, if you look at the past couple of years, his sinker has gotten hit really hard, and the fastball has actually held up a lot better. So you do wonder, even though he has been, proclaimed a sinker ball pitcher at times, if he should go more just fastball slider and maybe ditch that sinker, because it has been hit really hard the last 2 years. The one pitch that he has in his bag that has been very successful is his slider. He's generated whiffs at a 37% clip each year with that slider. So that is a pitch he can really build on right now. I'd almost wonder if he could throw that pitch a little bit more and get some more swings and misses and try to get a heading counts, maybe with the slider a bit. And then you can maybe throw that fastball a little bit more up in the zone and get some strikeouts. But overall, you look at the ceiling of David Peterson, and just generally, it's going to be a bit lower. The other thing I would look for the next season here is the Mets should maybe try to pair Peterson with Tomas Nido more often than not. He really got hit hard with James McCann behind the plate. The ERA was over 6 with McCann back there. It wasn't much better with Nido this past year, but it was certainly better. I just look at a pitcher that has to get by nibbling on the corners. He's always going to walk batters because he doesn't just have the stuff to go after hitters. So he is the type of pitcher that's going to be working around the edges. He's going to get into some situations where he walks some batters and he has to pitch himself out of some jams. I want Nito behind the plate when Peterson's on the mound because he is one of the best pitch framers in the game, if not the best. So if you have Nito back there, maybe that will generate some uptick in performance from Peterson because he's going to get some extra strikes. But overall, if you go into this next season and if David Peterson is your fifth starter, you're not feeling great, other than the fact that that could mean that he showed up in camp with some refined stuff and maybe he discovered some things and won a job in spring training. But overall, right now, I look at Tylor Megill and you're comparing these two guys. And we're going to go to Megill next here. I think Megill is the option that I would trust right now as the fifth starter. I think he has a much higher ceiling than David Peterson. And honestly, I almost think his floor might be higher too because the stuff is just better. And I really like the way he attacked hitters. I really liked his demeanor this past year. Whereas Peterson, at times, you just don't know what's going on there. But he's had these starts where it just looks like he can't get anybody out. And that is really concerning. Whereas Peterson has a little bit more overpowering stuff. So that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to switch gears and talk about Tylor Megill, and then we'll close things out talking about how the two of them can combine to fill that role at the back end of the Mets rotation and what we can maybe expect from them as a duo in 2022. In the past, this is the time of year that I would give up on my New Year's resolutions, but not this year because I've been sticking to my resolution to eat right thanks to Built Bar, which is almost not really a resolution because I actually really enjoy eating them. And I also love their new puffs. If you haven't tried them, you're missing out. Puffs are the first ever protein infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy. They're not just a protein bar, they're a treat, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate with flavors like cinnamony, churro, coconut, marshmallow, banana cream pie. They're all so good. And like the Built Bars, everything comes covered in 100% real chocolate. That is why they will help you stick to your resolutions because it's like a great snack. It's like replacing a protein bar in your diet with a candy bar, but you're still getting all the nutritional value of a protein bar where it's low in calories, high in protein. Built bars are the way to go to improve your diet. There's so many flavors to choose from, whether mint brownie, coconut almond. New this month, you have the white chocolate cookies and cream. I am counting down the days till that box shows up on my doorstep and I can try this new flavor. I cannot wait. And if you want to try Built Bar today, go to built.com, use the promo code LOCK15. You're going to get 15% off your next order. Again, that's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. This episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. So why endure the often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait for that person behind the counter to just look up your parts online and only choose the brands their warehouse happens to carry? When you have a computer yourself, you have access to rockauto.com. Why don't you go there yourself where you can save 30%, 50%, maybe even 100% more for the exact same amount of parts that the chain store guy is looking up on his computer when you go in? Rock Auto is a family business that has been serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years, and Rock Auto's prices are reliably low for every customer. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution to your auto parts needs. Go to rockauto.com right now, and once you're there, see all the parts available for your car or a truck. Make sure you write Locked On in there. How'd you hear about us, box? So they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. So when we look at the projection models for Tylor Megill, it is clear that Zips and all these other projection systems view him ahead of Peterson on the depth chart because they have him between 21 and 24 starts, 104 and 118 in third innings pitch, averaging 4.9 innings per start. That is, more innings, more starts than they're projecting for David Peterson, and rightfully so after the year he just had. Yes, he pitched to a 4.52 ERA, but he had flashes of dominance that we just haven't seen from David Peterson. They're projecting his ERA at 4.16 to 4.44, depending on the model. So, not an elite, pitcher. They're not expecting him to go out and suddenly, have a Jacob DeGrom ascent, as some have tried to manifest because they debuted at the, same age to the day. And there were these rookies that you didn't really think about much as they were going through the Mets farm system. And oh my God, look how great they are. And, that narrative got built up more when Megill went out in July and was just lights out, pitched to a 1.04 ERA in 5 starts. And you thought, oh my God, like this guy might get in the rookie of the year conversation at the time. There was some of those early whispers going on amongst Mets fans. And, just the thought that they might have found this guy that would suddenly be locked into the rotation for years to come. But what ended up happening is he started to struggle down the stretch. You look at some of his final starts there. He gave up 4 or more earned runs in 5 of his last 11 starts. Now, I do think it should be noted that he had a huge jump in innings this past year. Previous to 2021, his career high in professional baseball was 71 and two-third innings pitched. This past year, he had 89 two-thirds just in the majors and 130 innings overall. That is a massive jump, especially for a pitcher that didn't have any organized baseball to go to in 2020 due to the COVID year. So, I mean, his season was remarkable under that context. To fill in when the Mets desperately needed him, he was huge for that team. And he has a chance, excuse me as I knock something on my desk, and he has a chance to really continue that moving forward. And I think the upside is certainly greater than what you have with Peterson because he just throws harder. He has a much better fastball. And I think when you're projecting out a starter, that is something I'll bank on more than the off speed pitches. And, Peterson's more refined in that way. McGill's a prospect that before his debut, before he even got up into AAA, he was just throwing fastballs. He was just completely overpowering minor leaguers with that fastball, which was great to see. But the slider and the changeup were really pitches he was working on and developing throughout the year. And I think the success he had with them was really encouraging to get whiff percentages over 30% on those two offerings when they're really new weapons for him. That is a great sign for things to come. I think that Peterson, has the best off speed pitch with his slider. But look at the combination of all the parts, and Megill has it. I mean, that fastball at 95 miles per hour, he can get it up even higher. He's 6'7". Both of these guys are tall, but Megill, I think, has an inch on Peterson, and just in stature, he even just seems a little bit bigger as well. But really, really leverages his height a little bit more. The way he's able to just shorten that distance to the batter and then have that fastball jump on them and locate that pitch up in the zone to get strikeouts as well. It's a really tough pitch for batters to hit. I love his stuff. I love his makeup, his demeanor. He really would just be a bulldog on the mound at times, going out, getting a bunch of strikeouts. I look at him moving forward, and he just has a much higher ceiling. And honestly, I think the floor could be higher as well with that fastball, with the ability to attack hitters. Again, Peterson can't really do that because he's more of a finesse pitcher, which is fine. And maybe Peterson does have a long future in the Mets starting rotation, but Megill is the guy that could go out next year and pop in a way that changes all of the math on the Mets. I mean, right now, if you were looking at their prospects, and we're going to talk about this a bit moving into the next segment here, but their prospects for the upcoming season to fill out that spot, the back end of the rotation. If there's one guy on the Mets roster that could suddenly assert himself and be not just their fifth starter, but outperform that role in their rotation and be even better than a Taiwan Walker or a Carlos Carrasco. The only guy I see is Tylor Megill. But with that said, he's also a pitcher going into year two with the league having a full offseason, a full year of tape now to look back on, where he's going to have to make adjustments. And Peterson, had a ton of success in year one and really struggled in year two. So I don't think you can go into this season counting on him, just like I don't think you can go into the season necessarily counting on Peterson. And that leaves you in this same position that we've been talking about for weeks, if not months here, where the Mets might still need to add another pitcher. But I will say that there are other contending teams that would love to have a Peterson and a Megill vying for the fifth spot in their rotation, including Trevor Williams in that conversation as well. If the Mets don't add anybody, there is still a path where those two guys can fill that role. It just puts so much more pressure on the top four in the rotation to be healthy, first and foremost, and to be effective. But we'll talk about that more in just a minute. There might be less football being played, but betonline.net has way more stuff to bet on this playoff season. From scores, totals, player performance props, to where the next fire coach is going to land, BetOnline is the number one spot for all things NFL betting in 2022. And it's not just football. BetOnline.net's basketball, hockey, boxing, and UFC odds coverage is the best in the business. From sports right down to your favorite Vegas casino games, BetOnline is your number one online wagering destination. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports and play your favorite games. BetOnline, where the game starts. So if you look at what David Peterson and Tylor Megill did in 2021, they essentially did fill that fifth starter spot in the rotation, or maybe even the four starter spot, right? Because the fifth starter was maybe a revolving door at times of Joey Lucchesi and the Jared Eichhoffs of the world, and then eventually Rich Hill. So maybe you call them the Mets four starter in 2021. And altogether, you look at the numbers, and it was not bad. They pitched to a combined 4.65 ERA, and they made 33 starts. That's suitable from your fifth starter. You obviously want better. You would love for a sub 4 ERA, but you look at what they were able to do, the innings they were able to pitch, and if you go into this next season and you're going to get at least that, I think the Mets can still win the division. They can still get by. You look at what their starter ERA was this past year. I don't have it in front of me, but off the top of my head, I know they're at least 11th or better, or they were 11th or better this past season. They might have been even higher than that, but their rotation was not the problem. I know they ran out of arms down the stretch, but you're adding a Max Scherzer into this rotation. You are hoping for a healthier season from Jacob deGrom. You are certainly going to get more out of Carlos Carrasco. Taiwan Walker, I still believe that he can be closer to that first half version of himself than the second half version. And even if he's somewhere in the middle, that would be okay. He just can't be as bad as he was in that second half. But, Taiwan Walker is another pitcher that had a big jump in innings. So I think that could have been a little bit of fatigue, just like Tylor Megill might have had a little bit of fatigue. If you look at their projections, just based on Steamer, one projection model for the two pitchers, it had him at an identical 4.16 ERA. Now, you look at Zach Greinke, who I've been talking about on this show over the last couple of weeks as a starter. I like to see the Mets target because he would knock Peterson and Megill down a bit on the chain, and because I think that he'd bring a lot to the Mets as far as being a veteran who could just be another great mind to mix in to a group that already has Scherzer and deGrom. I think he'd fit in really well with that group. I also think that his health and his durability is much less of a question than any of the starters in the Mets rotation outside of Scherzer. So I still like the idea of signing Greinke, but you look at what he did in 2021. He pitched to a 4.16 ERA. So if you're comparing that to this projection model that has the two of them at a 4.16 ERA, if you combine their innings pitched and their starts, you're talking about 34 starts, 184 innings pitched. Greinke in 2021 made 29 starts, 30 games overall, 171 innings. There is a world where Peterson and Megill can combine to fill that role. I just think that because of the questions with Carrasco and deGrom and their injuries, with the way Taiwan Walker finished his season, that's where you still want to get that fifth starter, whether that is Greinke, whether that is Usei Kikuchi, Man, it's so much easier when I have the phonetics right in front of me if I try to say his name. But YK, our boy from Seattle, those are the two names that I think make the most sense in free agency. There is still the dream of making a trade, but how quickly can a trade come together at the other end of this lockout is a whole nother question, a whole nother discussion for another day. If the Mets are to go into spring training with David Peterson, Tylor Megill, Jordan Yamamoto, and Trevor Williams all competing for that fifth starter spot, I think they're okay. And I also would be, for the idea of maybe holding some of the Mets chips, the main chip being being Jeff McNeil, when it comes to trades, and waiting to see how the season plays out, waiting to see what McNeil looks like. If McNeil starts off the season and is great, you either could look at him as a vital part of your lineup moving forward, or he might build up his trade value a bit. You can look on the market if you really need a starter, maybe you acquire one mid-season. I think that the best path here is to sign somebody to compete with these guys, whether that's a minor league free agent or getting a legitimate major league starter that can, open the season in the rotation. And these two guys can go to Syracuse, refine their stuff, and be waiting for the first injury. These guys are going to pitch this year. There's no doubt about it. It doesn't even matter if the Mets trade for Luis Castillo. These guys will be in the rotation at some point in the season. And I think that that is still quality depth moving forward. You have just so many question marks that to rely on these guys as the clear cut answers to be your fifth starter, it's just a little bit dangerous. But I think that if the Mets end up going that way, as long as they fortify their bullpen and make some moves in that department, I can talk myself into this being the Mets starting rotation without any more additions, although I really do believe they will make one. Regardless, though, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now, for your second listen, check out Locked On Bets, hosted by your boy Q and handicapping expert Lee Sterling. Locked On Bets is where you want to go for all your daily gambling needs. You can follow Locked On Bets wherever you get podcasts.